Joining us, Kevin Tu, Managing Director of Agora Energy Transition China, and also in New York, Saleem Ali, Blue and Gold Distinguished Professor of Energy and the Environment from the University of Delaware, based in the U.S. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us during the holiday season of the new year. On the very first day of 2025, this new law came into effect. Mr. Tu, I understand it's about already 20 years in the making. Why it takes so long?
Actually, the idea originated as early as 1979. However, if we look at the energy sector, it's one of the most complicated sector in China because its management rights actually are fragmented among more than 10 ministries. So because of the difficulties of coordinate among different government authorities and as well as the increasingly complicated energy landscape, not only in China, but also in the rest of the world, it takes more than several decades for China to finalize its first ever energy law.
And by the way, there are other legislations covering the area of energy. For example, new energy law, for example, legislations related to environment and energy. Why is this one such an important piece of legislation? Kevin, once again.
So if we look at the individual laws you just mentioned, most of them actually were passed in 1990s. For example, the electricity laws in 1995, the coal law in 1996, and the energy conservation law in 1997. Even for the most recent one, the oil and gas pipeline law, it was passed in 2010. Because this individual energy sector regulation only covers one individual sectors. Yeah. So it becomes increasingly important for China to have an overarching energy law to coordinate relations among different energy carriers, as well as to set a direction for China to move its energy transition agenda forward. So that's why this energy law is vitally important for China to not only ensure national energy security, but also to fulfill its dual carbon goals in the coming decades.
Let's go to Professor Ali. We understand in the US, for example, there is the IRA. In Europe, there is the European Green Deal. All of them, both of them, and several other legislations from other parts of the world, all covering the new energy and energy transition. But tell us, what is your take, the differences between this legislation coming up in China and also those ones we just mentioned?
Well, I think this is a comprehensive energy planning law, which is very focused on making sure that China is well prepared for the green energy transition. In the case of the Inflation Reduction Act, which you mentioned, the IRA, that was actually meant to address an economic challenge, which was inflation, and to address that in a panoply of other investments, there was also a package for clean energy, and that has been one of the more successful parts of that regulation. But in that way, this law is quite different. It's very targeted, and it's got a very clear strategic planning goal. It's also meant to provide some clarity about balancing the role of the fossil fuel industry and the transition to renewable, cleaner sources. And that's what also makes it somewhat controversial, because the coal sector is still very much present in this legislation too.
Talking about the new energy, Kevin, we understand the new energy generation in China is already account a very significant percentage of the overall energy generation in China. And meanwhile, we see those that are coming from the new energy area, both technology-wise and storage-wise, have been quite impressive. So tell us more about how this law specifically could help to regulate and encourage new energy development in a vast system like that in China.
Yes, indeed. If we look at renewable development in China, China is not only the largest renewable energy market in the world, but also the largest renewable technology manufacturers in the world. So that's why it's vitally important for China to ensure the continuously successful deployment of renewable at scale across the country. So that's why the energy law is very important. If we look at the mechanism is embedded in the energy law, none of them actually is brand new. They actually are established administrative order or established routine that has been embedded in individual laws we mentioned before. However, if we look at where China is nowadays, according to the international energy agencies, the grid integration of variable renewables have different stages because China's wind and solar generation has accounted for more than 16% of national power generation. So it actually could be categorized as phase 3 of grid integration of variable renewable. However, China does have different provincial circumstances. If we look at China from Beijing to Qinghai, the phase could range from phase 1 to phase 5. So that's why it's very important for China to continuously to double down efforts to ramp up renewable development. But meanwhile, as just mentioned by the colleagues from the United States, in the current energy law, it's relatively weak to position how coal should be phased out in China's energy system in the coming decades.
What if I could just follow up? Is it more about how coal would phase out, or is it more about encouraging the development of new energy, and eventually there will be a dramatic transition? There will be a dramatic transition of the sources of energy in China, Kevin.
If we look at the status of coal in Western countries, including United States and in Europe, it's very clear coal's phase out is inevitable in many of those OECD countries. Coal phase out has already been legalized. So that's why if we look at the medium and longer future of coal, I'm relatively confident its status in China should become increasingly similar to the role in OECD countries instead of a typical developing country. So that's why, as the largest renewable energy manufacturers and major exporters in the world, China should play a more decisive role of promoting renewable and other clean energy technologies in its domestic market as well as overseas market.
Saleem, how do you see 2030 carbon peak and 2060 carbon neutrality, the targets China already clarified for quite some time to the rest of the world and to its own citizens, and also this new legislation on energy? How much roadmap is being clarified and guaranteed in this legislation in order to reach those two goals?
Yes, well, there are two main issues with the power supply. One is supplying what we call baseload power. And for that, fossil fuels have been very effective because you can switch them on and off. You can't do that with solar and wind. And you have to then have storage backup, which also China has invested in and this law presents. But that has its own critical materials challenges and so on. So for baseload power, the other option is nuclear energy, which China is also investing in. And so I think you will see the rise of nuclear for baseload power generation that is going to help with reducing the coal usage, and that will help to reach those targets which have been set for net zero.
On the other hand, we also see other legislations in China, even though some of them have already dated back to the 1990s. So one would assume, I'm not an expert in the field, the issues about health, environment related to energy have been addressed or can be updated in some of the other legislations rather than in one single legislation, Saleem?
A lot of that has been done through very strict control measures, through those enforcement of certain regulations, but also through ad hoc measures, not necessarily just through laws. Like during the Beijing Olympics, we saw, there were just measures put in place that you're not going to emit for certain times. So this kind of legislation is hopefully going to streamline some of those concerns long term as well. And I hope that in the long term, there will be economic incentives in place for a complete phase out of coal.
At this time, Kevin, we see quite some strategic security issues related to energy all over the world as a result of latest conflicts and also as a result of the latest geopolitics, as well as threats of climate change. So how do you articulate at this point how much this legislation is both about China setting a good example for itself, but also for other developing and emerging economies on energy transition?
Lots of crises. So that's why sometimes we can consider we are in a year of pony crisis. So that's why energy security is one of the most fundamental driving force underlying the current energy law, because energy security becomes such important policy challenges for China as well as many parts of the world. If we look at how China has tried to achieve the balance between energy security and its environmental targets in this law, on the one hand, the role of coal has somehow been strengthened because of the rising anxiety over energy security. But on the other hand, because of the aspiration of achieving the dual carbon goal, especially in terms of achieving the carbon neutrality before 2060, renewable energy has been prioritized for development in the coming decades. Meanwhile, if we look at how China might be able to help the rest of the world in terms of green energy transition, it's vitally important for China to double down the international energy cooperation principle embedded in this energy law.
Hydrogen is one of the shining words in this new piece of legislation. One see that as the very first time China recognized hydrogen as an important source of new energy, while at the same time regulating areas related to both the technology, storage, and other issues of hydrogen. Saleem, as an energy expert, how do you see this, the significance of this, and also why hydrogen now has becoming such a grand new area of potential and also for national security?
So in previous laws in China, hydrogen was regulated as a hazardous chemical. And so that created a lot of challenges in terms of its outflow. And so now what they've done is they've been able to incorporate it into the energy legislation to make it as a much more encouraging prospect. So with hydrogen, there are two aspects to it. One is that you currently have either natural gas being used to produce hydrogen, or you are using electrolysis to produce it. Now, for electrolysis, you can either use renewable energy, or you can use nuclear, or you can use hydropower or other kinds of sources. So you have to then think through what will be the production mechanism for hydrogen. That will be really important to see how that plays out. What we want is green hydrogen, which is that you're using renewable energy to produce it from electrolysis, and that would prevent some of the negative carbon impacts. Hydrogen is really important for China because you are a maritime nation with a huge infrastructure around shipping. And so in the future, hydrogen may well be a preferred fuel for shipping. It is very unlikely to be a preferred fuel for automobiles. It will likely be for shipping and maybe for aircraft. Airbus is making a hydrogen-powered plane, but it's not going to be a dominant source, but it's going to be really important as a mobile fuel.
Kevin Tu, Saleem Ali, thank you, gentlemen.